The city of Chicago had not yet fully woken when Ethan Cole's alarm cut through the silence of his penthouse bedroom at 5:47 in the morning. He was the kind of man who did not need reminders. His body had trained itself over 20 years of relentless discipline to rise before the sun, to dress before the world demanded it of him, to move through each hour with the precision of a machine that had long forgotten how to rest. At 38, Ethan Cole was the kind of name that made boardrooms go quiet and stock tickers pay attention. He had built Cole Industries from a single borrowed office and a promise he made to himself at 19 that he would never again know what it felt like to be powerless, to be small, to be the boy whose father left and whose mother cried herself to sleep over unpaid bills. He had kept that promise spectacularly. The penthouse was immaculate in the way that only professionally maintained spaces can be. Cool gray marble floors that caught the early morning light like still water, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan like a painting that changed with every hour, furniture that was chosen not for comfort, but for the impression it created. It was a home designed to be admired from a distance, and for a long time, that had suited Ethan perfectly. Distance was a language he spoke fluently. He showered in exactly 9 minutes, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that had been pressed and hung by his housekeeper the night before, and stood at the full-length mirror in his dressing room running a critical eye over the reflection that looked back at him. 38. A little silver had started threading itself into the dark hair at his temples. His jaw was set in the way it always was on mornings when the calendar was heavy, and today's calendar was extraordinarily heavy. A merger that had taken 11 months to negotiate was reaching its final signature stage. $300 million and the livelihoods of nearly 4,000 employees balanced on what happened in the next 8 hours. He did not allow himself to think about failure. He never had. He walked down the wide hallway toward his study, where his office bag had been packed the night before, documents organized, tablet charged, a printed agenda clipped to the inside cover the way he always preferred. The study was at the far end of the penthouse, a room lined on 2 walls with books that he had actually read, with a mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather, and with a single framed photograph on the shelf behind it, his mother, smiling at his college graduation, wearing the dress she had saved for 6 months to buy. He pushed open the study door and stopped. The bag was not on the desk. He stepped further into the room, glancing around with the slight frown of a man unaccustomed to disorder. He had placed it there himself last night, right at the center of the desk, angled toward the door, so he could grab it in a single fluid motion on his way out. He was precise about these things. He was precise about all things. He heard it before he saw her. A small, soft shuffling sound. The kind of sound that does not belong in a silent room full of serious things. He moved around the side of the desk and looked down, and there she was, Lily, the 3-year-old daughter of his housekeeper, Maya Reyes, who had apparently arrived early this morning and brought her daughter with her because the daycare had called at 6 a.m. with a closure notice that left her no other option. Lily was sitting cross-legged under the mahogany desk, his black leather office bag clutched to her small chest with both arms, her dark curls falling in soft waves around her round face. She was wearing yellow pajamas printed with small white ducks. Her feet were bare. Her eyes, when they looked up at him, were enormous and dark and completely, devastatingly unafraid. She shifted when she saw him, moved herself just slightly, adjusting her position so that her small body more completely filled the space beneath the desk, the bag pressed harder against her chest. She tilted her chin up at him with an expression that, on a face that small, managed to communicate something that could only be described as determined. Ethan Cole blinked. In his adult life, he had negotiated with governments. He had sat across tables from men who had spent decades mastering intimidation. He had walked into rooms where the combined financial weight of the people present could have bought small countries, and he had never once felt uncertain about what to do next. He had absolutely no idea what to do with this. He crouched down slowly to her level, the way you approach something you do not want to startle, and looked at her with what he hoped was a calm and reasonable expression. "That's my bag," he said. Lily looked at him. Then she looked at the bag. Then she looked back at him with an expression that communicated, with tremendous patience, that she was aware of this fact and did not find it persuasive. "I need it," he said. "I have a very important meeting." She made a small sound that was not quite a word and pulled the bag more firmly against herself, pressing her cheek against the leather with a kind of tender possessiveness that would have been funny under any other circumstances. Ethan sat back on his heels and stared at her. She stared back. She had one hand pressed flat against the bag as though it were a living thing she was protecting, and with the other, she reached into the small front pocket of her pajama top and produced a crumbled piece of cracker, which she offered to him with great seriousness, extending her tiny fist toward his face. He was so surprised that he almost took it. "Lily." He said her name carefully, the way you say the name of someone you are trying to reason with. "I'm going to be late." She pulled the cracker back. She squirmed herself further back under the desk, using her small feet against the floor as leverage, pushing herself into the corner where the two desk panels met, making herself as compact and immovable as a 3-year-old in yellow duck pajamas could possibly be. And then, with her big dark eyes fixed on his face, she did something that he would not be able to explain for the rest of his life. She smiled at him. Not a distracted smile, not the reflexive smile of a child performing cuteness. A real smile, full and warm and utterly without guile, the kind of smile that exists only in the faces of very small children and very old people who have long since stopped caring about being strategic. It hit him somewhere behind the sternum with a force that was entirely disproportionate to the size of the person delivering it. He did not move. Serena Voss had a gift for appearances. She had cultivated this gift the way other people cultivate careers, with intention, with investment, with an unflinching willingness to do whatever it required. At 31, she was widely regarded as one of the most beautiful women in Chicago's social orbit, a former model turned philanthropist, photographed at charity galas and wellness retreats and product launches, her life curated into a feed that made everything look effortless and luminous and real. She had the kind of face that made people trust her before she opened her mouth, and she had learned very early how useful that was. Her engagement to Ethan Cole had been celebrated on 3 magazine covers. She had choreographed every one of those celebrations. The truth of Serena Voss was something she kept buried under layers of performance, so thoroughly maintained that sometimes, in quiet moments, she almost forgot it herself. She had grown up in money that then disappeared, and the vanishing of it had done something to her that no amount of reclaimed comfort had ever fully repaired. It had planted in her a fear so deep and so constant that it had long ago stopped feeling like fear and started feeling simply like reality. The unshakable knowledge that everything could be taken, that nothing held, that the only safe position was the one where you were the one doing the taking. She had identified Ethan Cole the way a surveyor identifies load-bearing ground, not with desire, but with calculation. She had been patient. 18 months of patience, of softness, of learning his preferences and mirroring them back to him, of making herself into the shape of what he needed before he even knew he needed it. She had studied him the way you study a language you intend to live inside of, and she had been, by any measure, a spectacular student, but Ethan Cole was proving harder to actually hold than she had anticipated. He had a quality she had not accounted for, a self-sufficiency so complete that it left very little room for the kind of dependency she needed to cultivate. He was generous with her, but not porous. He was warm, but not absorbed. He liked her, she was fairly certain, but the deeper she looked, the more she suspected that his liking her was something he had decided rather than something that had grown organically from the center of him, and that distinction was the problem. Decided things could be undecided. She had started to sense, in the past 2 months, a pulling back. Small things, the kinds of things most people would not notice. A meeting rescheduled. A weekend together that became a weekend apart. Phone calls that went slightly shorter than they used to. She noticed all of it because noticing was her primary skill, and what she noticed added up to a man who was reconsidering, and a man who was reconsidering was a man who might walk away, and a man who might walk away was a disaster she absolutely could not afford. She had run the numbers. She had run them many times. What she stood to lose if the engagement ended, the social position, the financial security, the carefully constructed identity she had built around being Ethan Cole's future wife, was not something she was capable of absorbing. She had already borrowed against the expectation of this marriage in ways that were not visible and not small. She needed a different kind of leverage. The plan had come to her 3 weeks ago in the form of a man named Derek Marsh, whom she had known tangentially for years. A fixer was the polite word for what he was, a man who solved problems that conventional solutions could not touch. She had reached out to him through an intermediary, carefully, with the kind of deliberate indirection that she hoped would make the chain of connection impossible to trace. What she proposed was elegant in its brutality, not harm, she had told herself repeatedly, just control. Ethan would be taken from his car on the way to the office. Not today's office. She had chosen a morning when the building's security rotation changed, when there would be a gap in camera coverage on the route his driver always took. He would be held, briefly, in a property she had access to through a shell company Derek would establish, and he would be given a choice. Sign the asset transfer that she had already had drafted, a document that would put a significant portion of his personal holdings in her name, or face the unpleasant publicity of a scandal that she had spent months quietly assembling from carefully distorted truths. She was not a monster, she told herself. She did not want to hurt him. She simply needed a guarantee, and since he had not given her one organically, she would manufacture one. She had told Derek to have the car positioned by 6:30. Ethan always left for the office between 7:15 and 7:30 on merger days. She had learned his patterns the way she had learned everything about him. Thoroughly. She sat in her own apartment across the city, coffee cooling on the table in front of her, her phone screen showing a simple message from Derek. In position. She stared at it. Down in that black car, 2 men waited with practiced stillness, listening for the sound of a lobby door opening 63 floors above them. And in a study lined with books and silence, and the smell of old mahogany, a 3-year-old girl in yellow pajamas held an office bag with both arms and looked up at a billionaire with eyes that knew absolutely nothing about any of this, and everything that mattered. Maya Reyes had learned to apologize for herself in the way that people learn any language repeated often enough, automatically, without thinking, before she had even fully assessed whether the apology was necessary. She was apologizing now, standing in the doorway of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and her heart in her throat, because she had heard the particular quality of silence coming from the direction of the study, and she knew, the way mothers know things, through some channel that bypasses logic entirely, that Lily had done something. "Mr. Cole, I am so sorry." She was moving down the hallway as she said it, the dish towel still twisted in her hands. "The daycare called this morning. I had no one to call. I tried to keep her in the kitchen with me. She was there, and then she wasn't. I'm so sorry." She reached the study doorway and stopped. Ethan was sitting on the floor. Not the way people sit in chairs or on sofas. Fully on the marble floor, legs crossed loosely, his charcoal gray suit jacket gathering against the ground around him, his tie slightly loosened, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. Lily was still under the desk, but she had shifted forward slightly, and the two of them appeared to be in some kind of negotiation that involved Lily occasionally extending her cracker toward him, and Ethan occasionally extending his hand to receive it, and then having it pulled back at the last moment, and Lily finding this hilarious, And Ethan. This was the part that stopped Maya's breath entirely. Ethan was smiling. Not the polished, public smile she had seen in the photographs in the staff common room, the one that appeared in magazine features about his philanthropy and his business acumen. A different smile. Smaller, surprised, reaching his eyes in a way that the other smile did not. He looked up when he heard her. She braced herself. "I'm so sorry," she said again, stepping into the room, moving toward the desk. "Lily, come here. Baby, come to Mama." "She won't," Ethan said. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not the cool, efficient register he used for household matters. Instructions delivered clearly. Thank yous offered genuinely but briefly. The particular kind of respectful formality that told her he was a man who knew the difference between employing someone and owning them. This voice was softer. A little bewildered. "She has been refusing to surrender the bag for approximately 12 minutes. I've offered reasonable arguments. She offered me this cracker." He held up a small piece of slightly crushed cracker between two fingers. Maya felt something shift in her chest. "Lily," she said, dropping to her knees beside the desk, looking under it at her daughter's wide, delighted face. "Baby, that's Mr. Cole's bag. You need to give it back." Lily looked at her mother. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the bag. She looked back at Ethan with the expression she used when she was weighing something, which was an expression that had always seemed far too considered for a face that young, and which Maya had privately always found both endearing and slightly alarming. Then she moved the bag slightly, very slightly, not giving it exactly, but shifting it so that it rested between herself and the edge of the desk in a position that could be interpreted as either guarding it or offering it, depending on whether the person receiving it moved with gentleness. Ethan understood the terms. He reached under the desk slowly, without urgency, without the impatience of a man who had somewhere to be, and closed his hand around the strap of the bag with the careful respect of someone who recognized that an agreement had been reached rather than a surrender extracted. Lily let go, but she kept her eyes on him. Maya exhaled. "I am so sorry. I'll keep her in the kitchen for the rest of the morning. She won't bother you." "She wasn't bothering me." He said it simply, standing now, straightening his jacket. He looked at the bag in his hand and then at Lily, who was still watching him from under the desk with the solemn attention of someone who has not yet decided whether a situation is fully resolved. He looked at his watch. Maya watched the change move across his face, the return of the focused, forward-facing expression of a man with somewhere to be, with things weighing on him. She recognized it. She had worked in his home for 2 years, and she understood his rhythms in the way that people who are professionally invisible learn to understand the people they serve. "I should," he started. His phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned slightly at the name on the screen, and declined the call. Then he stood for a moment looking at the doorway of the study with an expression she could not fully read. Maya had started to guide Lily out from under the desk, lifting her with practiced ease onto her hip, when she noticed something. Lily, who had allowed herself to be picked up without objection, which was unusual enough on its own, had turned her face against Maya's shoulder in a way that was not her usual post-adventure sleepiness. She was looking toward the window of the study, her small face serious in the quiet way it sometimes became when something had unsettled her in a way she did not have words for yet. Maya followed her gaze. The window looked down on the street below. 63 floors up. Nothing was visible but the tops of buildings and the gray-blue morning sky. But Lily was looking at something, or the idea of something, with those dark eyes that had always seemed to Maya to see slightly more than they should. "She's been a little off this morning," Maya said, more to herself than to Ethan, "since we arrived. I thought it was just the disruption to her routine. Ethan was looking at his phone again. He did not leave. The call Ethan had declined was from Serena. He looked at her name on his screen for a moment after declining it, with the careful, neutral expression he had trained himself to use when he was thinking about something he was not yet ready to fully think about. Then he set the phone face down on the desk and looked at his watch again. 7:22. He should have been in the elevator 6 minutes ago. He was not in the elevator. He was standing in his study looking at a 3-year-old who was now sitting on her mother's hip and had transferred her serious attention from the window to his face, and he was experiencing something that he would have found very difficult to name, a reluctance, inexplicable and inconvenient, to walk out of this room. He was not a man who trusted feelings over facts. He had built his life on the exact opposite principle, on the understanding that feelings were frequently misleading and facts were reliably navigable. But somewhere in the last 20 minutes, something had settled into him like weather, like the atmospheric change before a storm, and it was making him slow. His phone buzzed. A text this time. Running late? Board is asking. His assistant, Marcus. He picked up the phone to reply and saw, below Marcus's message, an older notification he had not checked, a news alert from the building's private security service, sent to all penthouse residents. He almost scrolled past it. He did not. Advisory. Suspicious vehicle reported by multiple residents. Black late-model sedan, no plates, stationary on his building's address since 6/14. CPD notified, vehicle under observation. He read it twice. Then he read it a third time. His street. Since 6/14. Before he was due to leave. The cold that moved through him was not the kind you feel in your body. It was the kind that happens in the mind when something that seemed safe suddenly reveals its actual shape. He had been in business long enough at the level he occupied to understand that being a target was not paranoia but arithmetic. He had security. He had protocols. He had a team whose entire function was to ensure that the enormous machinery of his life kept running without the interruption of people who might benefit from stopping it. But he was also, at his core, a man who had grown up without safety nets, and that upbringing had given him an instinct for danger that all the years of success and security had never fully muted. He made 2 calls. The first was to his head of security, a man named Harris, who answered on the first ring and listened without interrupting while Ethan read him the alert notification and told him he had not yet left the building. Harris told him to stay. He used the tone of voice that was not a suggestion. The second call was to Marcus, who was told that the morning schedule was shifting and to tell the board to stand by. Then he stood in his study and looked at his phone and felt the particular sensation of having narrowly avoided something he did not yet fully understand. Lily had gone quiet on her mother's hip. She was watching him with dark, steady eyes, the cracker now fully consumed, her small hand resting on Maya's shoulder with the easy, unconscious trust of a child who has never questioned whether she is held securely. He looked at her. She had kept him here. Not with understanding. She was 3 years old. She had no understanding of what was parked outside his building or why. She had kept him here with a cracker and a smile and 12 minutes of stubborn, warm, completely unexplainable determination. Harris called back at 7:41. The black sedan had attempted to follow a car leaving the building, Ethan's car, dispatched empty as a test, and had been intercepted 4 blocks away by CPD units that Harris had quietly coordinated while Ethan was still upstairs. There were 2 men in the vehicle. There were, in the vehicle, items that told a story. That story pointed, through a chain of connection that would take investigators several days to fully trace, back to a phone number that Harris texted to Ethan without comment. Ethan looked at the number for a long time. He recognized it. He sat down at the desk, the mahogany desk, his grandfather's desk, and put his face in his hands for exactly 12 seconds. He had counted. He was a man who counted. Then he lifted his head. The investigation unfolded the way investigations do when the people conducting them are both capable and motivated, systematically, without theater, with a devastating attention to detail. Within 72 hours, the full architecture of what Serena had planned had been laid out in a secure document that Harris delivered to Ethan in person. The shell company, the property, the drafted asset transfer. The man named Derek Marsh, who had a history and a file and, it turned out, remarkably limited loyalty to the woman who had hired him once the legal consequences of his position became clear. Ethan read the document alone. He had sent Marcus home. The penthouse was quiet in the way it usually was at 10 at night, the lake outside the windows black and reflective, the city lights smearing themselves across the water. He had known Serena for 18 months. He had, in his careful, measured way, trusted her, or trusted the version of her that she had presented, which he now understood was a construction so thorough and consistent that he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: fooled, not humiliated. He was too private for humiliation to land cleanly, but fooled. The specific discomfort of a careful man who had failed to see what was in front of him. He thought about all the ways he might have been different, more open, more instinctively trusting, the kind of person who lets people close without the long, careful process of assessment that his childhood had made habitual. He might have loved her more immediately, more completely, in a way that would have made the discovery of what she was more catastrophic. Instead, he had loved her the way he did most things, at a careful distance. And that distance, which he had sometimes thought of as a failure in himself, had perhaps been the thing that saved him even before Lily did. He thought about Lily for a long time. 3 years old. Yellow duck pajamas. A cracker she kept offering and withdrawing with the absolute seriousness of a diplomat conducting a negotiation whose terms only she fully understood. He thought about Maya. He had employed her for 2 years. He knew, in the way that you know things about people you see daily, without ever quite having a direct conversation about them, that she was raising Lily alone, that her days started early and ended late, that she worked with a quiet efficiency that asked for nothing and delivered everything, that she had once, when she thought he was not watching, stood in the kitchen doorway after finishing her work and looked out at the lake with an expression of such private exhaustion and such private determination that he had turned away, feeling that he had seen something he was not meant to see. He had never asked her about any of it. He had not asked because he was a man who respected boundaries, and also because he was a man who was not sure what he would do with the answer. He picked up his phone and looked at it for a while. Then he set it back down. There was something shifting in him that he did not know how to name, not the sharp, clarifying shift of a business decision made, not the clean resolution of a problem solved, but something slower, something that felt like ground changing under his feet in a way that might take time to understand. In her small room in the staff quarters, Lily was asleep. Maya had told him so when he had asked, with the slightly uncertain look of a woman wondering why her employer was asking, and he had nodded and thanked her with a formality that was not distance, but simply the only language he had available to him. He had bought a small stuffed bear that afternoon. He had felt slightly ridiculous doing it. He had asked his assistant to find the best stuffed bear available in the city with same-day delivery and had received, 3 hours later, a soft gray bear of clearly superior quality, which was now sitting on his kitchen counter, because he had not yet worked out how to give it to a 3-year-old without the giving of it meaning something he had not yet defined. The truth was that Lily had done something to the carefully maintained distance that structured his interior life. She had not done it dramatically or intentionally. She had done it the way very small things sometimes breach very large defenses, simply by being completely, entirely herself, without any of the calculation or performance or agenda that the adult world had accustomed him to expect. She had just been a child, holding a bag, offering a cracker, smiling at him with the particular smile of someone who does not yet know that the world might require anything different from her. He was 38 years old, and he had not cried in many years. He did not cry now, but he sat for a long time in the quiet penthouse, and the lake moved outside the window, and something in him moved too. 3 weeks after the morning that almost was not, Ethan Cole made a series of decisions that surprised the people who thought they knew him. The legal matter relating to Serena had been handled with the precise efficiency that characterized everything he did. There were no public revelations, no dramatic confrontations. She had been presented with what was known, and with the choice of a quiet conclusion or a loud one, and she had, wisely, chosen quiet. She was no longer a part of his life, and the particular shape of what she had been, the 18 months of performance, the constructed intimacy, the planned harm, was something he filed away in the place he kept the things he had survived. Not forgotten. Filed. What surprised people was everything that came after. The first surprise was the bear. He had left it outside Maya's apartment door with a note that said, "For Lily." From the man whose bag she protected. He had written it, looked at it, found it slightly absurd, and sent it anyway. The second surprise was the conversation. He had asked Maya, on a quiet Tuesday morning over the coffee she made that he had never before acknowledged was significantly better than what his previous housekeeper had made, how she was doing. Not the reflexive social inquiry. The actual question, asked with the actual intention of receiving an actual answer. He had looked at her when he asked it, which was not always what people did when they asked that question. She had looked back at him for a moment with an expression that was several things at once, surprised, cautious, and underneath both of those, quietly, a kind of tiredness that was not complaint but simply truth. She had answered honestly. And then, because he had asked and she had answered, and something had opened in the specific quality of the silence between them, she had kept talking about Lily, about the challenges of solo parenthood, about the daycare that kept closing and the costs that kept rising and the particular weight of doing everything alone without anyone to hand even the smallest pieces of it to. She spoke without self-pity and without performance, the way people speak when they are not used to being listened to and suddenly are. He listened. He did not offer solutions immediately, which was his instinct and his habit. He let her finish. He asked one question and then another, and the conversation went 20 minutes past the point where he should have been at his desk, and when it ended, and she stood to get back to work with the slightly flustered air of someone who has said more than they planned, he said something that stopped her at the door. "You're very good at what you do," he said. "I should have said that before now." She turned. The expression on her face was one he had not seen directed at him in a long time, genuine, unstrategic, arriving from a place entirely free of calculation.
"Thank you," she said.
And then, "So are you." The third surprise, which came 6 weeks after that, and which no one in his professional orbit had seen coming, was the establishment of a fund within Cole Industries specifically dedicated to childcare subsidies for the company's staff, every level, every department, every employee who was also a parent navigating the relentless arithmetic of care. The announcement was made without fanfare, in a company memo that attributed the initiative to a recognition, quote, that the people who make this company work deserve to be able to do so without sacrificing their children. Marcus, reading it, texted him, "This is a first." What happened? Ethan had looked at the message and thought about how to answer it and ultimately replied, "A 3-year-old made a reasonable argument." What was harder to explain, and what he did not try to explain to anyone, was the other thing, the slower, quieter thing that was still in the process of becoming whatever it was going to be. He and Maya had coffee on 6 more Tuesday mornings after the first one. By the third, it had become a thing they both acknowledged without acknowledging, a quiet, standing arrangement that neither of them named but both of them kept. Lily, who had been permitted to roam slightly more freely after the morning of the bag, had developed the habit of bringing him things when she encountered him, a block, a small book, once a single sock that she offered with tremendous ceremony and that he accepted with tremendous gravity, and that had sat on the corner of his desk for a week before he worked out what to do with it. He was not a man who moved quickly in the terrain of the heart. He had not been permitted to develop the habit of quickness there, and he was old enough now to know that this was not a flaw to be corrected, but a reality to be worked with, carefully, honestly, at whatever pace the territory required. But he was moving. On a Sunday in April, when the lake was beginning to lose the gray of winter and the light was coming at a different angle, softer and more golden, he stood at the kitchen counter while Maya made coffee and Lily sat on the floor with a small puzzle, and he watched the two of them in the Sunday morning quiet, and he felt something that was not the absence of something but the presence of it. He felt held. It was new. It was not unwelcome. He was 38 years old, and he had spent a great deal of his life learning how to be sufficient unto himself, and he was finding, unexpectedly, that sufficiency was not the same as fullness, and that fullness had a feeling he had not known he was missing until he began, slowly, to have it. Lily looked up from her puzzle and found him watching and gave him the smile, the real one, the full one, the one that existed without agenda or performance or anything at all except the simple fact of a child who had decided, in the uncomplicated way that children decide things, that he was someone she was glad to see. He smiled back. Outside, Lake Michigan moved and flashed in the April light, and the city went on around the three of them in the Sunday morning way that cities do, loudly and without noticing, and inside the kitchen, in the warm, ordinary space between a counter and a window, something that had very nearly been lost was quietly, steadily becoming something new. He thought about what Harris had told him, in the dry, factual way that Harris told everything. If you'd left when you planned to leave, we couldn't have made the intercept in time. 12 minutes. 12 minutes held by a 3-year-old with a leather bag and a crumbled cracker and a smile that came from a place entirely beyond strategy. He looked at Lily. She had gone back to her puzzle, her small hands moving the pieces with focused patience, her dark curls falling forward. He did not believe in the word miracle. He was too practical a man for that particular vocabulary. But he believed in the word grace, in the idea that sometimes what saves you arrives in a form so small and so unlikely and so completely free of intention that the only honest response to it is to receive it with everything you have. He had received it. He intended, for the rest of his life, to be worthy of it.